In this Halloween season, I find myself casting my mind over the role of the mad scientist in popular fiction. I cannot definitively say who is the most iconic, but here are some of my personal favourites. At number 5 we have The Fly. Originally a short story printed in Playboy magazine of all places, The Fly was originally a film in 1958 and then again in 1986. In each version, a scientist working from home has all but perfected a scientific miracle: matter transmission. In the 50s original, Andre, having promised his wife he would no longer experiment on animals after the cat goes missing, puts himself into the transporter, but he is not alone, and ends up with the head and arm of a fly. I was 5 when I first saw this, and many scenes stayed with me for life. Mainly the fly with the human head and arm, stuck in a web pleading for mercy as a spider advances on him. To watch this film now, so many subtle, tragic ironies make the story, and hey, it's got Vincent Price in it, how bad could it be? It is also unusual in sci-fi horror, since it does not ultimately condemn science, but rather lets it off the hook, and despite a rather tragic ending. I shall never forget that scream as long as I live. And I never did. The Cronenberg remake sees Jeff Goldblum as Seth Brendel, and this time it's a gorier affair involving gene splicing, which takes its effect over time, itself tragic and resulting in suicide like its predecessor. It is fundamentally 80s in using the concept as a metaphor for addiction and HIV. With more emphasis on body horror, the 86 version manages to bring the chilling, haunting tragedy of the story into a very different decade. At number 4 then, Dr. Frankenstein. No list of mad scientists would be complete without a certain German doctor, originally called Victor Frankenstein and the creation of Mary Shelley. Famously, he made a monster, and sadly, while many film adaptations are very enjoyable, few are at all accurate, and while James Whale's efforts in the 1930s, starring Boris Karloff as the monster, are the most iconic, A Bride of Frankenstein is the superior of the two. The Kenneth Branagh version, with Robert De Niro as the monster, is the only version that comes close to what the book was doing, although the TV miniseries, Frankenstein the True Story, is my personal favourite. The first film version was a silent one-reeler in 1910, which cut out any reference to the monster being brought to life with electricity, owing to it being produced by the Edison Corporation. This curio, once missing and thought lost to the world for good, has luckily been found and can even be viewed here on YouTube. And number 3 is Dr. Jekyll. If any character has been reinvented even more often than Frankenstein, it has to be Dr. Henry Jekyll, or should I say Mr. Edward Hyde. Originally a parable on Victorian hypocrisy, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson was nearly lost to the world at the request of Mrs. Stevenson, had a dual release as both a penny dreadful and also a respectable book, and was denounced by half the churches of London, the other half embracing it and even quoting the text in sermons. A well-intentioned scientist, Jekyll wishes to separate the good and evil in men, but in practice unleashes his untempered animal side. A silent version, which exists to this day, shows Hyde as spider-like in an interpretation full of Freudian symbolism and surprisingly sophisticated social comment for 1920. The 1932 version makes Hyde simian, an ape-man. The 1941 version makes him a disturbing sexual id creature. This century saw a 21st century Jekyll and Hyde in Stephen Moffat's BBC serial called simply Jekyll, an underrated gem full of great acting and too many twists to keep track of. At number 2 I have Davros. Is it any surprise I would put the creator of the Daleks above even Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll? A product of the mind of Terry Nation, Davros was head of the Khaled people's scientific elite on Skaro, 1,000 years into a nuclear war so futile we never found out why it started. The population of Skaro are mutating anyway, so why not continue the Khaled race as mutant cyborgs, conditioned for survival? But at what cost? Davros sees himself as godlike, and has all emotions removed from the mutations except, of course, hatred, and the new Khaleds, or Daleks, will forever strive to exterminate all life that is not pure Dalek. This would mean mass genocide and eventually led to the last great time war. Quite possibly the maddest scientist in the history of the universe, Davros' greatest mistake is to overlook the obvious. He is not a Dalek himself, so they do not recognize him as equal, never mind superior, so of course they overthrow him. Other than that, He was a scientific genius, a political schemer on the scale of Shakespeare's Richard III, and ruthless enough to have his own people destroyed when they turned against his project, having seen it for the monstrosity it was. His debut Doctor Who story, Genesis of the Daleks, in 1974, saw Michael Wisher's impeccably chilling portrayal of Davros against Tom Baker's Fourth Doctor, and the audio adventure, I, Davros, delivers the childhood and backstory of how the man became the monster. And finally, we have The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man of H.G. Wells' book, an embittered scientist by the name of Griffin, is evil from the outset, but it's somehow a relatable evil. Paranoia and the desire for recognition have, after years of struggle, turned into megalomania, and he instigates a phase he calls the Terror. What makes this character so engaging is that while he is a monster, there is also something somehow pitiful about him. The Griffin of the 1933 film, directed by legendary horror veteran James Whale, is going insane owing to his situation. Imagine the effect of invisibility on your state of mind. And one of the drugs he used was known to have had a bad effect on animals. The Invisible Man is also a fun mad scientist. When he's just a shirt or just a pair of trousers, dancing and singing his way along the road, he lifts things up in front of people and waves them around to spook them. Anyone who claims that, once bestowed with invisibility, they would not mess with people just for fun at least a little bit, is surely lying. If you have a Halloween or horror-related top 5, or any number, please consider yourself tagged.